department. Hello?
I'm Antoinette Garavito. I'm Antoinette.
Okay, whereabouts in Albuquerque?
Who said it could use a help?
Hello? Antoinette, where are you? Antoinette? Hello?
It started with a knock on the door, and it would end in one of the most disturbing but intriguing ongoing mysteries. The chilling 911 call you just heard was made in 1987, a year after a 9-year-old girl was snatched from the front door of her home. Before tragedy struck, Antoinette was living in Gallup, New Mexico in 1986 with her mother, Penny Calladito, and her 2 younger sisters, Wendy and Sadie. Though Antoinette was only in the 4th grade, by all accounts she was wise beyond her years and exceedingly kind. The fact that her mother was a single mom may have been one reason she acted a bit older than her actual age, at least in the way she took on more adult responsibilities. At only 6 years old, Antoinette was helping to care for her younger siblings, cooking for them, cleaning the house, and ironing their clothes. Her youngest sister would later say that even though she was a child herself, Antoinette was like their mommy. It was this sense of responsibility that would be Antoinette's downfall. Penny left her children at home with a babysitter on April 6, 1986, so that she could go visit with some friends. By the time she returned to the apartment around midnight, her children were fast asleep. She checked on each of them, but she had no idea that the danger would arrive later in the night. Penny went to sleep around 3 a.m. without any sign that something horrible was just about to happen. Soon after Penny fell asleep, someone knocked on the door of their apartment. The knock wasn't loud enough to wake Penny, but it woke up her daughters. As the eldest, the responsibility to see who could be waiting beyond the door at such a strange hour fell to Antoinette. Her sisters both remember her getting up to answer the knock, but they never saw her return. Both went back to sleep, assuming that Antoinette would be there when they woke in the morning, but she wasn't. It seems likely that the person who was at the door was someone who Antoinette recognized since she opened the door for them in the middle of the night. Alternatively, it could have been someone who appeared to be a person of authority, dressed as a police officer or fireman, etc. A few hours later, around 7 a.m., Penny roused her 2 youngest daughters so they could head off to Bible school. It was only then that they realized Antoinette wasn't in her bed. They looked through the apartment, but the young girl was nowhere to be found. Penny immediately ran to their neighbors and asked them if they had seen Antoinette. When they told her they hadn't, she started searching the neighborhood until around 11 a.m. Only then did she call the police to report that Antoinette was missing. But the police response wasn't exactly what you may expect, given that Antoinette was a missing child. According to some sources, rather than hurrying to find Antoinette, the police told Penny that she had to wait 8 hours before she would be able to make an official missing persons report. It's important to note that today the law in New Mexico and in all other states do not require a waiting period to report a missing person. That may have been the law in 1986 when Antoinette went missing. Today, however, the law in New Mexico states that law enforcement agencies shall accept without delay and without exception for any reason any report of a missing person, and no later than 2 hours after receiving a missing person report or additional or supplemental information for the report shall start an appropriate investigation to determine the present location of the missing person and to determine whether the missing person is an endangered person and enter them into a nationwide database like National Crime Information Center. Searching for a missing person as soon as possible is vital to ensure the best possible outcome. For missing children, the best chance of finding them is within the first 48 hours of their disappearance. When the report was made, it was noted that Antoinette was last seen wearing a pink nightgown. She had other distinguishing features as being from Navajo and Italian descent. Her glasses, freckles, pierced ears, a scar on her knee, a scar on her lip, and she was wearing a silver chain with a small turquoise cross pendant. When the official investigation began, the police discovered that a neighbor had noticed an older brown truck with a New Mexico license plate just outside the Calladito household sometime between 6:30 and 7 a.m. the morning Antoinette went missing. This wasn't necessarily noteworthy, except that the neighbor claimed they saw a man exit the truck and head towards the house. However, the neighbor couldn't say if the man went inside or gave a description of what he looked like. Plus, Antoinette had likely been missing for a few hours by the time this suspicious man was spotted. Still, it was one of the only leads because there was almost no trace of Antoinette. With very little evidence, the case almost immediately stalled. This doesn't appear to be a random kidnapping. Someone knew that one of the girls, and not her mother, would be more likely to answer the door at that time on that specific night. The kidnapper may have been watching the family for some time. Alternatively, the kidnapper may have been even closer to the situation. We can speculate that he may have been a part of the group of friends Penny was with the night of the abduction. This would explain how he knew it would be a good opportunity to take Antoinette, as Penny was likely very tired after her late night out. In a strange twist, it wasn't until a year after she had gone missing that there was a disturbing break in the case. Well, sort of. The 911 call you heard earlier came into the Gallup Police Department. As you heard, the caller claimed to be Antoinette before she's cut off by a woman's voice and her own disturbing scream before the call ends. Penny eventually spoke about the lack of developments in Antoinette's case. She confirmed that she was certain the voice in the call had belonged to her daughter. Penny said, "And just by the way she says her last name and the way she screams sends chills all over my body. A mother knows, and I know that was her." However, Penny said she didn't recognize the woman's voice. Despite her confidence, the police weren't so sure. There is some speculation that the call could have been a cruel prank, made by someone who wanted to bring false hope to the grieving family. And to this day, no one knows for sure if it had actually been Antoinette calling for help. Either way, the phone call never led anywhere. In another strange twist, 3 years after she went missing, Antoinette's Aunt Luisa Estrada, who was regarded as intellectually disabled, went missing on September 5, 1989. Like Antoinette, Luisa had also disappeared from Gallup. However, she went missing from a park outside of a Catholic church while going for a walk. Though there was much speculation that Luisa's disappearance could be related to Antoinette's, there was no evidence connecting the two. A month after Luisa went missing, her father asked for investigators to look for his daughter in Juarez, Mexico. A family friend in Mexico told him that they had spotted Luisa in the area, but they didn't realize she was missing at the time. The police found Luisa in Juarez less than 2 hours after her father spoke to them. She was discovered wandering through the streets and looked dirty and disheveled. Luisa was barefoot with blisters over her feet and had an infected cut on her leg. Both she and her father started to cry when they were finally reunited. What exactly happened to Luisa during the month she was missing is a bit of a mystery. Luisa told her family that a man had taken her from Gallup, tied up her wrists and ankles, and told her, "Don't tell your daddy." She said the man then drove her to Mexico. The police in Juarez later revealed that they had actually found Luisa on the streets 2 weeks before she was officially recognized. Because they didn't realize she was missing, they released her at the border. There aren't any other details about what happened to Luisa during that time, but at least her case had a happy conclusion. The next development in Antoinette's case was an alleged sighting in 1991. The sighting was at a diner in Carson City, Nevada, which is around 870 miles northwest of Gallup. She'd been spotted by a waitress who noticed an unkempt girl in her early teens with 2 other companions. While the 3 were dining, the girl continually dropped her fork. The waitress didn't think this was too odd, except that every time she helped the girl retrieve her utensil, she tightly squeezed her hand. Too late, the waitress realized that the girl was trying to get her attention. The trio left the diner, and as the waitress was cleaning up after them, she found a note scrawled on the girl's napkin, which she had hidden under her plate. The note read, "Help me, call police." But by the time she found the napkin, the group was long gone. The waitress was sure that the girl matched a description of Antoinette. This very well could have been a human trafficking situation. There are a few warning signs of human trafficking, which include the following: appearing malnourished, showing signs of physical injuries and abuse, avoiding eye contact, social interaction, and authority figures or law enforcement, seeming to adhere to scripted or rehearsed responses in social interaction, lacking official identification documents, appearing destitute or lacking personal possessions, working excessively long hours, living at place of employment, checking into hotels or motels with older males, and referring to those males as boyfriend or daddy, which is often street slang for pimp. Poor physical or dental health, tattoos or branding on the neck and or lower back, untreated transmitted diseases, small children serving in a family restaurant, security measures that appear to keep people inside an establishment, barbed wire inside of a fence, bars covering the insides of windows, not allowing people to go into public alone or speak for themselves. No developments ever came of this supposed sighting. When Antoinette's case was featured on the show Unsolved Mysteries in 1992, another far more intriguing lead came to light. Though years later, Wendy Montoya came forward and spoke on both the show and with law enforcement officials, revealing that she'd actually witnessed her sister's kidnapping that night. As a 5-year-old, Wendy wasn't entirely sure what she saw or heard, except for a few details. When Antoinette got up to answer the knock, she had the forethought to ask who was there before opening the door. Wendy was sure she heard a man reply, "Uncle Joe." Thinking it was one of her relatives, Antoinette opened the door. She couldn't have known she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. If Wendy's memory is in fact accurate, the person must have been someone close to the family to know that they had an uncle named Joe. That's when Wendy claimed she saw two men she didn't recognize grab Antoinette and pull her from the apartment. They covered her mouth as she struggled to get away and forced her into a van before they drove off. Though Wendy claimed to have witnessed her sister's abduction, instead of alerting her mother or other sister, she went back to sleep and didn't tell anyone what she saw until questioned. Likely because she was so young, she didn't truly grasp the gravity of the situation at the time. It's important to note that there are some discrepancies with this story. The issue is not Wendy's claims themselves necessarily, but rather the timeline laid out by sources discussing the case. One newspaper from Gallup in 2016 wrote that Wendy didn't come forward with this story until 6 years after her older sister had gone missing, claiming she was too scared to tell anyone about it until then, while other sources believe she told police what she saw earlier on in the investigation. To add to the confusion, an Albuquerque journal in 1987 states that it wasn't Wendy at all who witnessed the incident, but her 7-year-old sister Sadie. In this article, Sadie heard both a man and a woman at the door, who claimed they were Antoinette's aunt and uncle and that she should hurry and open the door because they were cold. Eyewitness testimony is notoriously unreliable, especially many years after the fact. Many people believe that memories are stored exactly as the event originally happened. However, research has shown that is not the case. In fact, in one memory experiment, participants were led to believe that they had become lost in a shopping mall when they were a child, but that event actually never happened. Memory is malleable and subject to being contaminated, especially over time. The memories that Wendy and Sadie later came forward with could have been shaped by leading questions they were asked over the years, by speculations made by family and friends, or by what the girls heard in the news. The most reliable reports would have likely occurred when the girls were first questioned, right after Antoinette disappeared. Regardless, police followed the lead, believing that Uncle Joe was the girl's step-uncle Joe Estrada. But when the authorities questioned him, they realized he couldn't have been involved in Antoinette's disappearance and cleared him of any suspicion. Ultimately, Antoinette's disappearance ripped the Calladito family apart. Penny struggled to even talk about Antoinette without crying. Penny Calladito passed away in 1999 and never learned what became of her eldest daughter. However, recently investigators have revealed that they suspect Penny may have known more about Antoinette's disappearance than she ever shared. One reason for this allegation is that at the beginning of the investigation, she had failed a polygraph test, though it's important to note that polygraph tests are notoriously unreliable. No other details have been released about what information the police suspect Penny may have known. Police often use polygraph tests as a way to see if someone is being deceitful. However, not in the way one might assume. Polygraph tests and their results are not admissible as evidence at trial. Therefore, they're generally used by police as a scare tactic to get suspects to confess or to see if they're willing to even take one. It has been shown that a lot of variables can make polygraph exams unreliable, such as the level of skill of the examiner and the level of psychopathy in the subject. For example, a true psychopath may be able to pass a lie detector even when they are guilty. The test detects stress reactions in the test subject's body, such as sweat, heart rate, changes in breathing, and blood pressure. Someone with no conscience may not feel and therefore not display the same stress signs other people do. In addition, some people are so nervous during the test that they will show signs of deception when in fact they are telling the truth and are just displaying stress signs from the experience. 2021 was the 35th anniversary of Antoinette's disappearance. To this day, there have never been any solid leads or developments in Antoinette's case, and police believe that she is likely deceased, making it all the more tragic. But because of the alleged sighting, there are theories that Antoinette is a victim of human trafficking. I can't help but wonder if she managed to make that disturbing 911 call all those years ago. If maybe there is still a chance she's out there somewhere. To this day, her case remains open. Alright, let's move on to today's second case, which is one that is truly twisted and has far more questions than answers. During the very early hours of September 24, 2005, 17-year-old Philip Ho Sing Sit in Toronto, Canada, left home to meet up with his friends. It isn't known for sure which of his friends he headed out to see, and as you'll understand in a minute, this could be a very important piece of evidence. When he didn't make it back home, his family reported him missing. From the very beginning, his case hit dead end after dead end. It wasn't until almost a year after Sit went missing, on August 8, 2006, that there was any development, but it wasn't the outcome anyone was hoping for. Sit's skeletal remains were found in a forested area in the York region, about 31 miles from his house in Scarborough. The police have revealed that Sit's death was the result of a homicide, but they never publicly released the exact manner. The tragic end of Sit's case took a very peculiar turn only a few days after his body was found. On August 14th, less than a week after Sit was confirmed dead, 3 of his friends all independently headed out from their homes in Toronto. None of them ever returned. 17-year-old Yiwa Eve Ho left her downtown home to meet up with a friend at the Eaton Center. When she failed to arrive, her worried friend reported that she was missing. This friend had been talking to Ho just before she vanished and said that she never mentioned any concerns to her. She was the last person who ever spoke to Ho. On that same day, Ho's boyfriend, 17-year-old Jackie Lee, left his apartment in Scarborough to go to work. His mother was the last person who saw him. Everything seemed perfectly normal, and she even spoke to him on the phone later in the day. He never said anything to indicate that something was wrong, yet that was the last time anyone heard from him. Finally, also on the 14th, 18-year-old Kevin Lim, a friend of both Sit, Lee, and Ho, told his grandmother that he was just quickly heading out from his Scarborough home to buy a drink. No one saw him again. All 3 friends vanished. But they didn't just disappear, they seemed to have completely fallen off the face of the earth. From the moment that all 3 went missing, their cell phone records, bank records, and online communication all stopped at once. This was especially odd because investigators believe that both Lee and Ho had their phones with them when they went missing. As well, Lee probably had some cash with him, but nothing substantial, while Lim didn't have either his phone or wallet on him. As 3 individual missing persons cases launched, investigators quickly realized that the friends knew one another, and the police believed that the cases could be related. The 3 teens became known as the Toronto Trio. What is possibly the weirdest part of this case is that no one is sure if the friends met up before they went missing and vanished together, or if they all went missing individually but on the same day and around the same time. From the circumstances that each left their homes, it seems likely that they weren't together when they vanished from different parts of the city. But the real question is, how are these 3 disappearances related to Sit's death? It can't be a coincidence that just days after his body was found, 3 of his friends went missing. Well, any connection isn't clear. Police suspect the foul play may be involved in the 3 teens' disappearances because little else can explain how none of them left any trace behind. But there is another possibility, though it is especially strange considering the circumstances of each disappearance. The police have considered that there is a chance the 3 went on the run and have been in hiding all this time. Why, you may be wondering. A few theories are that the friends witnessed Sit's death, and when his body was discovered, they realized they could become a target themselves and decided to go into hiding. However, it seems unlikely that teenagers would be able to leave no trace behind without a lot of help. Along this same line of thought, some people suspect that they may have feared getting in trouble with the police if they knew something about what happened to Sit, or that they could have even been involved. Despite this, the police have never considered the 3 as suspects in Sit's death, though they did want to talk to them because they believe that they may have had information about what happened to him. One fact that puts a damper on the speculations that the Toronto Trio was hiding out somewhere is that Ho didn't have a passport at the time she disappeared, so she wouldn't have been able to get too far without encountering some serious obstacles. As well, none of the 3 were exactly prepared for a life on the run when they left their homes to meet up with friends or go to work. It seems likely that the disappearance of the Toronto Trio is related to the murder of their friend Sit, based on the fact that they went missing less than a week after his body was found. However, it seems somewhat unlikely that the trio went on the run together. There would have been some kind of paper trail, withdrawing large amounts of money, coordinating plans, etc. They likely would have needed help from an outside source if they did go on the run together. It also seems unlikely that all 3 of them would have been okay with leaving behind their family and friends, with no attempts to contact them over the years. The person responsible for their disappearance may have been attempting to stop them from coming forward with information they may have had about Sid's death. Another possible scenario to consider is that the trio was involved in a double murder, with one of the members of the trio taking their own life after silencing the other two. Still, with no real evidence, all there is speculation. One officer looking into the case has said, "We have absolutely no leads on this case at all." And that's exactly how this case still remains to this day. On that disheartening note, we've made it to today's final case, and it is the most twisted of them all. It was like any other day when Jim Pitson dropped his son, 6-year-old Timothy, off at school in Aurora, Illinois for his kindergarten class on May 11, 2011. But without Jim's knowledge, Timothy's mother, Amy Fry Pitson, arrived at the school soon after he had left and took him out of class, saying there was a family emergency. But there was no family emergency. Instead, the two headed off to complete some errands, including dropping off Amy's vehicle at a repair shop, after which they had one of the employees take them to the Brookfield Zoo. The mother and son spent much of the day walking around the zoo together, which might sound like a pleasant afternoon, but it was all going to take a turn for the worse. By 3 p.m. that afternoon, Amy and Timothy were back at the repair shop picking up the car. Instead of going home, though, they headed to Gurnee, where they stayed the night at the Key Lime Cove Resort. Jim, on the other hand, had no idea where his wife or son had gone, because no one told him that Amy had taken Timothy, likely assuming the father knew he had gone to the school to pick him up after class. It was only then that he realized Timothy wasn't there. Frightened, Jim began trying to find them. He called Amy's phone over and over, but she never answered. He didn't know where to start looking. Around the time this incident occurred, the couple's relationship was a bit rocky. Amy occasionally had bouts of depression, which she took medication for, and she had recently been considering a divorce from Jim. But still, her actions seemed to come out of nowhere. It would be important that Amy was taking her depression medication as prescribed. If she regularly missed doses, took it sporadically, or suddenly stopped taking it altogether, it could dramatically affect her mood and increase her risk of self-harm. While Jim was panicking, Amy and Timothy were still on the move and ended up in Wisconsin Dells, Wisconsin, where they stayed at the Kalahari Resort. On May 13th, 2 days after he was taken from the school, Timothy was seen on security footage for the last time at 10 a.m. Amy, on the other hand, was making calls. Around 1:30 in the afternoon, she called a few of her family members, where she reassured them that both she and Timothy were fine and said they weren't in any trouble. She didn't call Jim. Timothy's voice was heard in the background of one of these calls, saying that he was hungry. From the sound of his voice, it seemed like everything was okay, yet no one heard from him again. Amy went to great lengths to make sure that Jim couldn't find them, from withdrawing Timothy from school unexpectedly to staying at one resort for a single night before moving on to another resort. She wanted to make sure that he would not catch up with them. It's also noteworthy that Jim didn't receive one of the multiple phone calls she made to family. Amy felt like she was in control of the situation. She had Timothy and she was calling all the shots. Perhaps she felt like she could control her family's reaction with reassurances, but she knew that she wouldn't be able to control Jim's reaction about his son being taken. That night, Amy was spotted in Winnebago, Illinois at a family dollar store. Timothy wasn't with her, but Amy bought some stationery and left. She also stopped by a grocery store before she checked into the Rockford Inn in Rockford, Illinois that night. The next day, May 14th, Amy's body was found by the inn's employees. She had taken her own life by ingesting enough antihistamines to overdose, as well as cut her own wrists and neck. But inside the room, there was no sign of Timothy anywhere. In fact, there were a lot of things missing. For one, Amy's cell phone that she had used to call her family was nowhere to be found, and the clothes she wore when checking out of the Kalahari Resort were gone. Also missing was Timothy's Spider-Man backpack, his toys, clothes, and car seat. Cell phones have become one of the best pieces of evidence in solving crimes, as they are not only a way to track someone's location, but the texts and other data is stored and usually retrievable, even if someone deletes the information from their phone. Police and prosecutors often subpoena cell phone records to put together a timeline of events and to obtain other vital evidence. Timothy's disappearance and Amy's actions to take her own life were well thought out and planned. The fact that her cell phone is missing could mean that she deliberately hid it to avoid her location being traced. There may have been evidence on her clothes and Timothy's things relating to his disappearance, so she destroyed or hid those as well. Again, she went to great lengths to avoid Timothy ever being found. Amy left a final note along with 2 cryptic letters she sent in the mail, one to her mother But if investigators were hoping to find any answers, they only came up with more questions. In the letters, Amy claimed that she had given Timothy to people that cared about him, but she never said who they were. She also wrote that no one would ever find him, and she was right. Legally, you cannot just give your child to another person. You're allowed to relinquish parental rights, but you would need to do so through the family court system. The letters may have been a slight deviation in her original plan, since she didn't buy stationery until the previous night. She may not have been originally planning to leave a note, or it could be as simple as her forgetting to bring paper with her from home. The reference to giving Timothy to people that cared about him could have a more cryptic meaning, i.e. he is in heaven with angels, rather than literally meaning she gave him to an actual person. At first, investigators were hopeful that Timothy really had been dropped off somewhere safe and believed that the car was a sign he was being taken care of. That is, until they found out that Timothy's grandmother had the car seat with her for a week before he went missing. Investigators quickly grew desperate to find any trace of the young boy. They turned to one of the only clues they had, Amy's vehicle. Inside, they found something that undoubtedly made their hearts sink: blood that was matched to Timothy. However, it wasn't necessarily sinister, as the young boy had apparently had a nosebleed while in the seat some months earlier. It was another dead end. But the car was also covered in dirt, and police tested the soil and grass they found in order to trace where exactly the vehicle had been. It was determined that the car had probably been in a meadow in Lee County or Whiteside County in northwestern Illinois, which could be where Amy dropped Timothy off, hopefully with someone who was taking care of him. But this also didn't help to narrow down the search. All evidence pointed to one thing: Amy had planned this. Months before going missing, she had taken 2 trips to the same area, perhaps scoping out someone to leave her son with, or even to do something far more unthinkable, like find a place to hide a body. Jim, though he was shocked to learn that Amy had taken her own life, said that he couldn't ever imagine that she would hurt Timothy. Amy may have been trying to punish Jim or get back at him after their recent arguments by taking Timothy. If the couple was considering divorce, that may have pushed Amy over the edge, as she likely wouldn't have full custody. Given her history of depression, she may have even felt that her mental health could be used against her in court, and she would get less than 50-50 custody. She may have been considering taking her life for some time as a result of her struggles with depression. However, once she made the decision to do it, she may have realized that she didn't want to leave Timothy behind without a mother. It seems somewhat unlikely that she gave Timothy to another person. She was apparently close with several members of her own family, so it'd be surprising that she would keep Timothy from them and give him to a stranger. If she did kill Timothy, that may have been her, albeit sick and delusional, way of bringing him with her. There weren't any more leads for years. Eventually, Amy's cell phone was found in 2013, where it had been abandoned by the side of the road on Route 78. Once again, there weren't any clues in the area or on the phone. After more time passed, something that everyone wondered was why Timothy himself never came forward in all the years he was missing. If he was okay, surely he would be curious about his past, or would want to put his family's minds at ease. Had Amy told him something that kept him quiet? It's impossible to know for sure, but the silence has led many to consider that a horrible fate may have befallen Timothy. His father maintains that he still thinks he's alive. It looked like Timothy was gone forever, and his family was starting to lose hope. But then something truly unexpected happened. In 2019, a young man was found wandering near the Ohio border. When he was approached, he was extremely confused, but he said one thing very clearly. His name was Timothy Pitson. The man said that he had just escaped from captors who had been holding him hostage for all these years. He said he had been repeatedly abused and that he just wanted to go home. When the shocking story broke, it made national headlines, with people celebrating that Timothy had finally been found. But something wasn't quite right. While at the hospital, the man refused to be fingerprinted, but eventually agreed to give a DNA sample, and that's when it was uncovered that this man wasn't Timothy at all, but 23-year-old Brian Michael Reaney, who had just been released from prison before he was found on the side of the road. Reaney had a history of claiming to be a victim of child trafficking. He was charged with both identity theft and lying to federal investigators. During his trial, Reaney struck a plea deal and was sentenced to spend 2 years in prison. Reaney likely makes up stories like this because he enjoys the attention he receives. He likes tricking people and wants to see how long he can get away with it. Reaney got what appears to be a sweetheart deal from prosecutors. He obviously had prior convictions, as he was just released from prison, which always increases one's sentence. and his identity theft charge would be aggravated since he assumed the identity of a child. There must have been issues with proving the charges or some other factors for the prosecution to give him such a short sentence. Though this strange twist was certainly astonishing, the truth is that Rennie lied and brought false hope to the distraught Pitson family. Timothy Pitson is still missing, and it doesn't appear that we are any closer to finding out what actually happened to him.